Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good day, wherever you are in the world today. My name is Herb. I'm an alcoholic. Welcome to our Big Book 12-Step Workshop. Please join me in prayer for an open mind and open heart. God, please set aside everything that I think I know about myself, my unmanageability, the 12 steps in you, for an open mind and a new experience with myself, my unmanageability, the 12 steps, and especially you. Please join me in the serenity prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things that cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference. Well, we're moving on. The penultimate, a word I don't use very often. It means the second to the last. In this case, the second to the last teaching on step 4, penultima, not the ultimate, the penultima, just before the last. And this is about identifying and analyzing the obstacles in us to the power that is in us. Step 4 literally says a moral inventory. Not in contrast to immoral. Look up the word if you need a refresher. Moral comes from the Latin mores, meaning law or practices. What are the values? It certainly was true when we looked at resentment. The fruit of the root of self-centeredness, we looked at values, but in a very specific way, we looked at our beliefs in column 3 and our motives in column 4. And we saw that our beliefs were delusional and our motives are corrupt. It's not a judgment, it's an evaluation. No wonder we have problems. If the lenses through which we're looking, our beliefs, are distorted, we're going to see whatever we see distorted because of the lenses. Not because we've got something wrong with our brain or wrong with our character. So resentment, as we learned, comes from the Latin word sentire, to feel. And when we put an re in front of it, it means again, to feel the anger again and again and again. And we dealt with that by analyzing it, certainly, but also by praying for its removal, that prayer for the removal of deep resentment. Hopefully, between the analysis of column 3, column 4, and the prayer, most of your resentments are beginning to lose their power. It will certainly happen more measurably by the time you finish your 5th step. But the next piece of work that we did was on the fear inventory. Anger, that survival mechanism of fight. Fear, that survival mechanism of flight. But now we're going to take a look at the survival mechanism of sex, but it falls, I believe, in the category of freeze, fight, flight, freeze, in the sense that it's at least in my case, it reflected a major core of dishonesty. Now, there's lots of other things that we will look at, dishonesty, secrets, guilt, and shame, that's the ultimate assignment that I will give you next week, not this week. I'm just letting you know that next week we will take a look at the work that you do, the questions that you have around the sex inventory instructions. And then next week, I will give you instructions on how to finish your fourth step. So as you can see, we're coming by the end of August to finishing at least the instructions on the fourth step. You may not be finished with your fourth step by the end of August, but you will have received all the instructions you need to finish. And if you plan on finishing before we end in December, I originally scheduled the workshop to end before Thanksgiving, but due to the way it has unfolded, we will probably go to mid-December before we end the workshop. So have a plan. Take a look at the schedule. That's 3 months from now. I mean, we've been together almost 8 months. It blew my mind today when I realized that, looking at the plan for finishing the workshop. So have a plan. If you plan on finishing the fourth and fifth step, which I think would be a very doable and very honest and very helpful, effective way of approaching your step work, is to have a plan to finish your fourth and fifth step by the end of the year. Actually, 6 and 7 would go really fast, and then you would spend perhaps a good portion of next year completing your 8th and 9th step. It's a great plan. I mean, if you can do it all this year, oh, even better, but don't be artificial about it. Don't be unrealistic about it. So today we're going to look at the sex inventory. It's on page 68 is where it starts in the big book. It says at the last paragraph on page 68. Now about sex. Many of us needed an overhauling there. But above all, we tried to be sensible on this question. There are 2 primary themes in these next page and a half concerning the sex inventory. The first theme is that one, common sense, the middle ground, balance. The second theme is that the only criteria for your behavior is you in relationship with your higher power. It's really that simple. Well, I'm going to spend some time unpacking it now. But I wanted you to know that there's 2 major themes here, and there's some very specific instructions on page 69. On page 68, he continues. It is so easy to get way off the track. Here we find human opinions running to extremes, absurd extremes. So he said, I'm going to coach you and counsel you to walk the middle path, common sense, but now I'm going to describe the outer limits on both sides. Human opinions running to extremes, absurd extremes, perhaps. One set of voices cry that sex is a lust of our lower nature. So that negative outlook of culture, sex is a bad thing. He's going to talk a little bit about what I think is, I'm guessing to be the Victorian era, Queen Victoria, dress up through the neck to the earlobes and down past the ankles. One set of voices cry that sex is a lust of our lower nature, a base necessity of procreation. Then on the other side, he says on page 69, we have the voices who cry for sex and more sex. Bill came out of the roaring 20s, who bewail the institution of marriage. That's when the whole idea of open sexuality and freedom was very prominent in society, coming out of the roaring 20s and into the Depression, who think that most of the troubles of the race are traceable to sex causes. Well, I think he was referring to the new psychology of Freud. Bill was a reader. He was paying attention to what was going on. They think we do not have enough of it. That's the roaring 20s. The libertine, not libertarian, libertine, or that it isn't the right kind. They see its significance everywhere, clearly a Freudian orientation. One school would allow man no flavor for his fare, Victorian, and the other would have us all on a straight pepper diet, libertine. So he's talking about the two excesses as he sees it from his vantage point in 1939. Keep in mind who Bill is and when he's writing. We want to stay out of this controversy. We, meaning Alcoholics Anonymous, the 12-step fellowship, the 12-step culture. Bill is speaking for the fellowship at this point. Now he's going to tell us what the suggestion is from the viewpoint of AA and the 12-step fellowship with regard to sex. We want to stay out of this controversy. We do not want to be the arbiter of anyone's sex conduct. I hope you've highlighted that. We have no opinion. AA, the 12-step fellowship, and any legitimate 12-step fellowship that follows the spirit of AA has no opinion. Heterosexual, homosexual, celibate, no opinion. Monogamous, polygamous, no opinion. We have no opinion. But you do. You as an individual, just like with what we looked at in anger and fear. In anger, looking at our beliefs and our motives, what's deep down inside of us are principles. In fear, what's deep down inside of us in terms of our self-reliance versus our trust? Principles. He's going to suggest that we find our principles. Or if we don't have them, that we identify principles that we want. Those were my two options. I identified through the sex inventory, principles that I had that I never accessed or were visible to me, and principles that I didn't have, but that I wanted to have because I wanted to be a decent human being, at least by my standards. Notice, it's all coming from the inside. It's not coming from culture. It's not coming from my religious tradition. It's not coming from AA or my sponsor. It's not coming from my wife at the time. It's coming from deep inside me, not from outside of me. We all have sex problems. We'd hardly be human if we didn't. What can we do about them? Well, that's his warm-up. Now he's going to do a deep dive into the instructions, which are, again, like the fear instructions, really straightforward and simple. There's very little analysis here. Like with the fear unpacking, very little analysis. It was more following the trail of our emotions rather than following the logical sequence of our mind. Here it's really observations, asking questions and answering them, simple questions. We reviewed our own conduct over the years past. Well, very much like the resentment inventory, very much like the fear inventory. We're doing an inventory of our behavior. This is about genital sex. If you have never done a sex inventory, then go back to your earliest consciousness of your own body and then of other people's bodies and what kind of behavior developed over that. That would include playing doctor and masturbation. If you've done a sex inventory, then you might want to just go back to the last time you did a sex inventory. It might have been last year, it might have been 10 years ago. But it's not about going back to the beginning of your consciousness again. Now, the caveat to that, the exception to that would be if by the time I finish with the big book instructions, you say, oh gosh, I didn't do a sex inventory that way. Well, then you may want to go back and review your sex history since you were an adult. And I would say 18, 21, right in that area. I'm going with the legal parameters of what constitutes an adult. I'm not going with the emotional or psychological parameters. I wasn't an adult until I was 48 years old. No, by my criteria today, I was a child. I was the king baby with a spoon banging on my high chair, wanting more. And that's an image that Freud created, king baby. All right. This process was the rite of passage at age 48 that took me to adulthood. And this particular inventory or piece of the inventory, the sex inventory, was life-changing for me. Certainly the resentment inventory was life-changing. The fourth column, the first time. The third column, the second time I went through the work. So it was progress. It was a process. I didn't get it all at once. The fear inventory I did each time, and I got deeper and more aware of the levels of fears that I have over about a 10-year period, doing the work 3 different times. Nothing tremendously profound in the fear inventory, but each time more revealing. But the sex inventory, the very first time I went through the work, it is so simple that the curtain was pulled back on me and my behavior and my morals or lack thereof, and my principles or the lack thereof, or my transgressions, conscious or not. We reviewed our own conduct over the years past. So we do a look back over our shoulder and we make a list, just like we did with resentment, just like we did with fear. As I say, if you have done a sex inventory and these suggestions are the ones that you used to do your inventory, then go back to the last time you did a sex inventory. If you've never done a sex inventory, or if you've never done it this way, then go back to your earliest memories, perhaps, as I say, when you're 18 or 21, and move forward. Now, it's not about having a long list. It's about having a list. And if you've been particularly busy, you will see that many of the circumstances are the same. One-night stands, bar hookups, weekend flings, short-term relationships. By short-term, I mean a month or 2 or 3, maybe 6. Long-term relationships, if you've had several of them, they could be a category, because although let's assume that we're talking about somebody who has been busy. This isn't my story, but let's say somebody had not been sort of married or for maybe till they were 30 or something like that. And they had between ages 18 and 30, they had several long-term relationships, 6 months, a year, 2 years at a time. If you did the sex inventory on, let's say, 5 or 10 of those relationships, you would see at the end of the inventory that the dynamics were absolutely identical. Absolutely. Circumstances were different, time frames were different, experiences were different, but all the names would be interchangeable because the dynamic was the same. And I'm saying that for the people who have been active, I mean, really active, that it might be good to have categories. Affairs at the office, affairs in the church, affairs in the neighborhood. Relationships before I was married, relationships after I was married. As I said, one night stands, weekends. So I'm not telling you at this point what to do, but it's not about volume. Once again, once you do inventory, as it's suggested here, which I'll talk about in a minute, there's 9 questions. And once you've answered those 9 questions on perhaps 10 different situations, I mean, really different situations, you will have a complete picture. Now, it may be that you want to do 10 more, or 20 more, or 30 more, depending on your own prayer practice and your relationship with your sponsor and your own inclination. But just like with resentments, you do 10 column 3s and column 4s on different people, and you got it. You effectively analyze 10 different fears. You got the pattern. Same with the sex inventory. I am not, please don't interpret this as I'm minimizing what you need to do. I am not doing that one bit. This is all very sacred work. How free do you want to be? Do not minimize it. But at the same time, don't exaggerate it unnecessarily. And some of you are perfectionists. We know you're out there. Probably I used to say 30%. I think it's 50%. But it doesn't matter. There's a large percentage of you who just have this itch that you need to scratch by being excessive. And that's a relative term. It's just not healthy, and it's not necessary. All right, let's get into the questions. I made separate questions for separate words. Even though the words are in one sentence, I give each word their own sentence. That's why there are 9 questions. Here's the sentence, page 69. Where had we been selfish? I stop and ask that question. That's the first question. Well, we already saw that on page 62. Bill says selfishness, self-centeredness is the root. And I brought up the PowerPoint today showing the slide of step 4 with selfishness, self-centeredness at the foundation, the root. And the fruit of the root was resentment and fear and dishonesty as represented in sex, and then some other things that I threw in there to kind of round it out. But then there's another word in that sentence, dishonest. So I made a complete sentence out of it. Where have I been dishonest? And there's another word. I made a complete sentence out of it. Where have I been inconsiderate? Then there's a separate sentence. Whom had we hurt? Well, very much like the resentment inventory, where the 8th step says, we make a list of the people harmed. We did so when we took inventory. Here it is. Not only does it give us a perspective on the sex behavior, but it also, for the inventory, it also helps us begin to compile our 8-step list. Whom did we hurt? Then there's a sentence with many words in it that I made into many questions. Did we unjustifiably arouse jealousy? That's a sentence. Suspicion, that's a separate sentence. Bitterness, that's a separate sentence. Where had we been at fault? That echoes very much with the 4th column, doesn't it, of the resentment inventory. What's my role? What's my responsibility? What's my part? Where had we been at fault? A separate sentence. That's the 8th sentence. And all of that is preparatory. Necessary, certainly in the beginning. But it's all a preparation for this final question, this number 9. What should I have done instead? That was the curtain render. The light shone on all of my mischief. What should I have done instead? So I looked at that as a single man coming out of a monastery, finding some activities that had been prohibited before, and here I am 24 years old, and the whole world opens up to me. And so I was finding relationships with anybody who would have relationships, including married women. And so in my heart of hearts, 4 years sober, I look back on that behavior and I thought, okay, that was inappropriate for me as a single man to be dating married women. That was my value, but I don't put that on my sponsees. It's my value. We are not the arbiter of anyone's sex conduct, said the big book, and I adopted that philosophy. I am not the arbiter as a sponsor, but I am the arbiter of my behavior. What should I have done instead? So then I look at the fact that I'm a married man in a committed relationship based on fidelity, and I'm not doing that. Now, those were both principles that I had down inside of me. But there were other principles that I came across in answering those questions in the various situations I had found myself in up to that point, where I said, I don't have any principle, but what is the appropriate principle that I would want now with the consciousness that I have now? I'm hoping you're hearing this, because what I am not saying is I am not judging my behavior at age 48. Excuse me, I am not judging the behavior at age 20 by my consciousness at age 48. I'm evaluating it. If that situation at age 20 or 24 were presented to me today at age 48 with 4 years of sobriety, how would I want to behave? The question is, what should I have done instead? I couldn't have done anything differently than I did. I could not change one of the actions from age 24 to 48, those 25 years rounding out. I could not have changed. I could not have changed any of those actions because I didn't. I was unconscious, clueless. I didn't know that I didn't know. I didn't know that I had principles. I didn't know that I had values, or at least they were easily overridden, consciously overridden or unconsciously submerged. I'm not making excuses. I'm not trying to cut myself any slack. But what I'm also not going to do is take on the burden of guilt and shame for those 25 years or 20 years of mischief. But I want to learn from them. Today, you could ask yourself today with your consciousness, if that same situation were presented to you, what would you do? How would you want to behave in terms of your values and your principles? That's the point of it, is to become a more conscious person today, to become a more conscientious person today, to have a better conscience today. That word comes from the word scion in Latin, S-C-I-O-N, which means knowledge. Consciousness means to be aware of and to know and to have some knowledge. That's the point of question number 9. And Bill suggests later on here that we create our sex ideal from that material. We got this all down on paper and looked at it. Again, this is not just a thinking exercise or a talking exercise. This is a writing exercise, pen and paper. In the resentment and in the fear and in the sex inventory, he repeats that to make sure that we know this is a written inventory. So then he continues. In this way, we tried to shape a sane, we already know the word comes from the Latin word sanus, healthy, and sound ideal for our future sex life. That's where I came up with the comments that I've made just earlier. How am I going to behave today and how am I going to behave tomorrow by my standards? Not feeling shame and guilt in an unhealthy way for my past behavior, feeling shame and guilt in a healthy way for my past behavior and regretting it, of course. Well, maybe not, of course, but I did. For all the hurt that it created with everybody that was involved with it. We subjected each relation to this test. Was it selfish or not? In other words, was I only concerned with my needs and I didn't consider anybody else's feelings or needs? Well, of course, he gets into then prayer because he holds the attitude with regard to resentment and fear. He clearly holds the same attitude with regard to sex, that we're as powerless over these instincts as we are over our addiction. He said it so in Resentment on page 66. He was very clear. We're as powerless over our sexual behavior as we are over alcohol in the case of the alcoholic. So what happens when we're powerless? We pray. We ask God. And I've said that's the code in the big book for pray. His recommendation is to pray to a power other than ourselves to mold our ideals. Translate. Give us knowledge and help us to live up to them. Translate. Give us power. The big book's or internal integrity is organic. Isn't that the way step 11 is structured? Praying for the knowledge of God's will for us and the power to carry it out. Because that's how we are built as human beings. We need to know better, then we'll do better. Sometimes we need to do better, then we'll know better. But that's the dance for the human being. Knowledge and action. We remembered always that our sex powers were God-given and therefore good. So there's no negativity toward this. Neither to be used lightly or selfishly, nor to be despised and loathed. So avoiding those two extremes that he spent so much time on, the Victorian or the libertine. But the middle road, the healthy road, the balanced road, the common sense road. Of course, that's still relative. My sponsor wasn't much help here. My step guides were. So was a therapist. So was a spiritual director. I had to go to many different people to kind of sort out my own thoughts and feelings on these things. But in the final analysis, I was responsible for my thoughts and feelings and my behavior around that. And so very consistent with the comment above, we want to stay out of this controversy. We do not want to be the arbiter of anyone's sex conduct. Down here he says, whatever our ideal turns out to be. Big Book has no opinion. Whatever our ideal turns out to be, we must be willing to grow toward it. So again, it's a process. It's about progress, not perfection. We must be willing to make amends where we have done harm. Again, a signal to the 8th and the 9th step, provided that we do not bring about still more harm in so doing. In the 8th and 9th step instructions on 76 to 83, Bill has 2 pages of very clear instructions on dealing with infidelity. He doesn't use the word. When we get there, I'll unpack it the way I understand it and have experienced it. Fabulous direction for repairing damage. In other words, we treat sex as we would any other problem in meditation. So now he's taken us from prayer to meditation. The prayer was for knowledge and power. Now he's saying, and in meditation, we ask God, that's how we begin our meditation, what we should do about each specific matter. We're looking for guidance. This was his training in meditation, as I've mentioned many times from the Oxford group. They use meditation primarily as the tool of receiving guidance. Asking a question and then listening for the answer. Many of you have talked about two-way prayer. That originated, as I understand it, in the Oxford group. I ask a question, then I listen to my thinking as the medium of the message. And in fact, the Oxford group people kept a pen and paper next to them to write down their thoughts and their feelings and their awareness as the possible answer to the question that they asked in prayer. And that was their meditation. The right answer will come if we want it. Oh, hear that condition. If you're really open, if you really want the truth, if your intention really is to be a better person, to live by principles, not just to escape from trouble or to get out of harm's way or to get your spouse back, those are intentions that are helpful, but they're not the primary motives. The primary motives is to become a decent human being, have a relationship with reality, have a relationship with the community. Now he's going to elaborate on the second theme that I mentioned. The first theme was common sense and balance. The second theme is about God and your relationship and getting answers that way. God alone can judge our sex situation. Boy, I hope as sponsors you're hearing that. God alone can judge the individual sex situation. But Bill is a realist. All right? God is wonderful, but may not be very accessible in a practical sense. So he says right away at the bottom of page 69, counsel with persons is often desirable. Talk to your sponsor. Talk to a sensibly experienced good friend. Talk to a therapist. Talk to a sex therapist. Talk to a priest or minister or rabbi or some type of ordained or trained person. Talk to the professionals. But, page 70, we let God be the final judge. You can talk to anybody you want, and some of them will co-sign you if, in fact, you mislead them with misinformation. The thing is about rigorous honesty, transparency with yourself as well as with other people. Page 70 at the top, we realize that some people are as fanatical about sex as others are loose, going back to that first theme. We avoid hysterical thinking or advice, our own thinking or other people's thinking and advice. You can always find people that will agree with you if you present the case correctly in your favor. That's hardly objective. You want people to tell you the truth. Well, ideally, we want people to tell us the truth. My best friends are best friends because they're willing to tell me the truth and hurt my feelings. Because they have my best interests at heart, not the relationship maintenance through a lie. Page 70. Suppose we fall short of the chosen ideal and stumble. So let's assume that in 1988, I'm going through this work and I become very conscious that I have been violating human decency and, in fact, my commitment of fidelity, and that I'm straighten up and fly right. I'm from now on, no more mischief. All right. But let's say something happens. It didn't, but let's assume that there was an occasion for whatever reason, and I, as they say, sinned or missed the mark. The word sin comes from archery, by the way, as I understand it. Sin, missing the mark. That's a lot more gentle than it was ever taught to me by Sister Mary Alicious. Suppose we fall short of the chosen ideal and stumble. Does this mean we are going to get drunk? I'm reading now from the book. Some people tell us so, but this is only a half-truth. It depends on us and our motives. Here we are again. Motives coming from the Latin movere. What's driving us? Movere, what's moving us? To move, movere, motive. If we are sorry for what we have done and have the honest desire to let God take us to better things, we're as powerless over our behavior as we are over our addiction. We let God take us to better things. We believe we will be forgiven and will have learned our lesson. All right, now here's the big red stop sign. If we are not sorry and our conduct continues to harm others, we are quite sure to drink, to relapse. We are not theorizing. These are facts out of our experience. And the man shut the book at this point when we were going over it. And he said, Herb, he says, I now know who you are from your conversation about your preparation of your step 4 inventory. I know what your values are. I know what your life circumstances are. And you have only 2 choices if you want to stay sober. You have to stop your behavior, or you have to get a divorce. He says, these are not my conclusions. That's the conclusions from the book. Your value proposition is fidelity. That's yours. I didn't give it to you, but that's yours. You've come to me and we've all sorted it out. And if you don't change your behavior, you will get drunk again. And that was the last thing I wanted, as well as some other motivations, by the way. These are facts out of our experience. Now he gives us the final summary paragraph, and that's where I'm going to stop at the end of this next paragraph. To sum up about sex, we earnestly pray for the right ideal for guidance, knowledge, in each questionable situation, for sanity, balance, healthy thinking, and for strength to do the right thing, the power to be able to do it. If sex is very troublesome, we throw ourselves the harder into helping others. We think of their needs and work for them. This takes us out of ourselves. It quiets the imperious urge when to yield would mean heartache. The root cause of our anger, our resentment, is selfishness. The root cause of our fear and anxiety and lack of trust is selfishness. The root cause of our sexual misbehavior, whatever that is for you, a transgression of your own principles or principles that you think you should have by this time. The best antidote to that self-centeredness is other-centeredness. We've heard it consistently through the book from unmanageability till now. We think of their needs and work for them. We throw ourselves the harder into helping others. And that was Bill's experience, of course, when he was given to depression, very serious depression. He would go to a hospital, he would go to a jail, he would go to an institution, he would go to a meeting, and he would try to help somebody else. And his depression lifted, not totally perhaps, but it became lighter, less of a burden. So the assignment for next week is to take a look at assignment 17. Oh, not yet, not yet. I'm going to do that next week. I mentioned that. For next week, certainly make a list of your sexual behavior as I described it earlier on, with names, that's all, with just the names. And you might take a look at the sex inventory worksheet in the Way of Life document, which has those 9 questions. At the top of it, well, here, let me bring it up. So what we want to do is we want to make that list. The list itself ends with the 9th question, which is the one I want you to spend the most time on. What should I have done instead? Not from a guilt or shame standpoint, but from your current level of consciousness based on whatever principle it is that you think that you have or would want to have at this point, if that particular opportunity were presented to you today. What should I have done instead? Well, not got involved. What should I have done instead? Been considerate. What should I have done instead? Think of their needs. What should I have done instead? Not gone to the bar. What should I have done instead? Be faithful to my wife. I mean, lots of very simple answers help me to then, in my prayer and meditation, develop some principles that allowed me to develop the sex ideal. Identifying those principles that come out of what I consider to be healthy actions. So you can see this is the document from the Way of Life material. And at the top, I just to get into it, the man suggested that I think about the circumstances. How did I get involved with this particular person? And what happened as part of the involvement? We're not talking about describing the sexual genital activity. You'll notice that in all of my unpacking of the 2 pages on the sex inventory, not once did Bill talk about what gender. Not once did he talk about frequency. Not once did he talk about position. Not once did he talk about anything to do with genitalia. It's not about genital sex in that sense. It's about that behavior. But then what's our thoughts? What are our feelings? What are our motives? What are our principles? And the final 3rd bullet point there to sort of warm you up to the thing, or did it end at the end of the night, at the end of the weekend, at the end of the month, after 2 years, or at a divorce? So many different answers. And we're not looking for therapy here in terms of a catharsis. These are just the facts, like we did with column 2 in the resentment inventory. 3 or 4, 5, 6, 7 words at the most, to kind of like just get you in the moment, in the encounter, and then ask these questions as I indicated in my commentary. But at the end, I put in a very specific paragraph. The first 8 questions are important, but they're all leading to the answer to the 9th question. What should I have done instead? By my principles, my consciousness, my awareness today. The answer to question number 9 will help you become conscious of the principles you have already but are not aware of, or the principles you want to have that will guide your future sex motives and behavior. They will form the basis of your sex ideal. I've had lots of interesting experiences with sponsees taking men through the work, and some of them are ADD, most of them actually, And they have a hard time sort of processing a lot of information at the same time, or they're dyslexic and they get things mixed up. And so I try to repeat and I try to be clear, but every once in a while something happens where there's a nice humor to it. A man came back to me and he was reading his sex ideal. Well, he had not heard me correctly, because what he was reading, what he wrote was his ideal sex. I didn't stop him because it was funny and interesting. But at the end of it, I said, that's wonderful and it's appropriate. You can write about what your vision is of ideal sex, but that's not the assignment. The assignment is the sex ideal, the principles upon which you're going to base your behavior. But from that very conversation, it opened up the world to me to make recommendations like I did with the resentment inventory, to use column 3 and column 4 in a variety of ways that would be helpful. And so why not have the ideal woman? Why not have the ideal man? Why not have the ideal partner? Why not have the ideal marriage? Why not have the ideal date? I'm talking about a complete variety of vision statements that would help you really get clear with you what you're looking for, rather than this blind stumbling in the dark, looking for, quote, the magic, which is wonderful. It's just not very effective. Get really clear in advance who you are and what you're looking for. I may have mentioned this once before. I heard it from somebody else, and it just was such wisdom. Had nice humor in it, but some real wisdom. And the man said to another man, write out your vision of the ideal partner woman for you. It was a heterosexual relationship and conversation. Write out the ideal woman for you in partnership. The man went away and wrote up this wonderful one-page thing, brought it back, read it to this man, and the man says, when you become the man that woman would be attracted to, you might have her in your life. Well, I hope you heard what I just said. That is really powerful. Yeah, become the man that woman would be attracted to, and maybe you'll attract her. It doesn't put the burden on her, it puts the burden on you to be the partner that would be attracted to the partner that you're trying to attract into your life. I'm sure you stories and wisdom sayings and experiences with some humor and some with not, but that's what we'll do this time. Oh, and so if you make the list, it should be fairly easy to do. Don't worry about making it complete. Just get some names on the paper or some situations on the paper, because maybe it doesn't involve other people. Maybe it's masturbation, maybe it's pornography are the issues, or other situations where genital sex is involved. It's not about displaying that here on the call. That's for your sponsor and or fifth step work, but do it for your own benefit, and then take at least one of them and write out your answers to the 9 questions. I prefer that you would do 3. Probably wouldn't take you 5 or 10 minutes per page to do that, because it's not analytical, it's just an answer. And you're welcome to write more than a word or a phrase. A sentence or 2 might be okay if you're going to write something about being inconsiderate or whatever. But again, this is not an opportunity for catharsis or therapeutic work at all. This is not a place for stream of consciousness. If you want to do that, do it on a separate piece of paper. It's fine. It could be therapeutic if you're remembering stuff that is really a heartbreak for you, or you really need to process some emotions. Do that separately. But in the worksheet, just keep it pretty straightforward. We're just looking for facts. We're looking for, as Bill talked about, the truth. And if you could do up to 3, I don't want to distract you from your resentment work. I don't want to distract you from your fear work. But I do want you to experiment with the sex inventory so that you will be able to, at least in an in a way of hearing, you'll be able to participate in next week's discussion about your worksheets. And then next week, I will give you the final assignment. Next week, I will give you the assignment 17, not now. I mean, you're welcome to do it if you want, but I'm not going to be talking about it next week. I will be talking about it the following week.
You were talking about, and it kind of just went over my head. I don't really understand it. You were talking about looking at your behavior in the context of now, I'll just use myself. Now I'm 54, but I had behaviors when I was 25.
Yeah.
How do I look at them? You were mentioning about like if I can look at them in a certain way today where it doesn't have guilt. Can you talk about that a little bit?
No, I'm not saying it may have guilt for you. I'm just saying that we're not looking to stimulate guilt, healthy or unhealthy. That's not the point here. So the example would be at age 48, I'm doing this inventory, looking back at age 24, and looking at a situation, and the suggestion to me was to bring that situation to my current life today at age 48, 4 years sober. If I were single, as I was when I was 24, and I had the opportunity to date a married woman, what would be my my action, my suggested action, my desirable action today? All right. Well, today I wouldn't date a married woman at age 48. All right. Even if I was single, I would not date a married woman because that's part of my moral makeup. I'm not asking anybody to judge it. I'm judging it. My moral makeup says it's inappropriate of me to date a person who's in a committed relationship. Well, it doesn't even have to be married, in a committed relationship. So I'm going to stop now and see, did that help clarify?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. I did understand you correctly.
Yeah.
And then I didn't catch the direction as far as masturbation and pornography.
Well, is it an issue for you? I mean, it was a huge issue for me because I was raised in a Catholic tradition through to age 24, and in prior to 1964 anyway. Vatican II might have made a difference. It was like, you're going to go to hell. It's a mortal sin. Well, I had to get some therapy around all of that to find out. So what's about maturity here in terms of male behavior in this area? And I came in prayer to an understanding that it had nothing to do with morality. It had everything to do with psychology. And I made a decision that there's nothing inherently wrong with masturbation. All right. And that probably what it was for me, it became that it minimized and interfered with my relationship with my wife. So it was an unhealthy act for me. It was unhealthy to do that because it minimized my energy and willingness to have a effective and affectionate relationship with my wife. See how I sorted it out. And then pornography, I never had a problem with it. I never did like it, actually. For whatever reason, it was like fingernails on a chalkboard for me always. Not that I didn't use it sometimes for entertainment, but then I saw, that's just not where I want to go. Other people, they have no problem with anything along this line because they weren't raised in the same way I was. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Okay. Thank you so much.
Yeah. It's about really getting clear and about healthy. Yeah. And there's so much unhealthiness around the sexual behavior on both sides, as Bill said.
two things. One, on the sex inventory, I just wanted to share something that was helpful to me. It was, one of the purposes was like to uncover anything that might be shame-based related to your body, or what you had done to your body, or what you've allowed other people to do to your body. So like to uncover anything that might be some kind of lingering shame, and to just get it up and out, so that
That certainly would work with regard to the final closure instructions that I have to deal with guilt and shame. Absolutely. I want to just be careful here, though, because this sex inventory is about voluntary sex.
right.
So this isn't about sexual abuse. This isn't about rape. This isn't about non-voluntary, non-consensual activities. That there's a place for that, but this isn't it.
I guess people of a older age came into the with old value, maybe that Puritanian thing that you talked about, the Victorian image, and it's like, wait a minute, why are you hanging on to that belief? You know, whatever.
Well, team, thank you so much for sharing your lives again with me today. A very robust discussion. We'll have a more unpacking of the sex inventory on Monday, and then certainly on Tuesday, going forward like we have with each of the components of the step 4 material. Please join me in this prayer of transformation. Lord, make me a channel of your peace, that where there is hatred, I may bring love, that where there is wrong, I may bring the spirit of forgiveness, that where there is discord, I may bring harmony, that where there is error, I may bring truth, that where there is doubt, I may bring faith, that where there is despair, I may bring hope, that where there are shadows, I may bring light, that where there is sadness, I may bring joy. Please grant that I may seek rather to comfort than to be comforted, to understand than to be understood, to love than to be loved. For it is by self-forgetting, that one finds. It is by forgiving that one is forgiven. It is by dying that one awakens to eternal life. Amen. Thanks, everybody.